There's a particular kind of flag that doesn't scream at you, it whispers. It shows up in small comments and often jokes, in a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. It's the subtle, often socially acceptable way a man chips away at your self-worth through criticism disguised as humor, control dressed up as concern. And it can be so easy to miss at first because it doesn't look like abuse. It looks like charm with a little edge. Maybe he makes fun of your goals in a way that feels playful, but something in your gut tightens. Maybe he critiques your outfit, your laugh, your decisions, but says it with a grin. I'm just being honest. Or, you know I'm kidding. And for a moment, you wonder if you're being too sensitive. But that's the trick. These kinds of comments are designed to make you question your reality, to second guess whether the discomfort you feel is valid. That's not love, that's control. When someone consistently uses jokes to belittle you, the goal of the gray rock, what they're really doing is testing how much of yourself you're willing to shrink. They're seeing if you'll laugh along, if you'll accept a version of love where affection and disrespect come in the same sentence. And the more you tolerate it, the more it becomes normalized. We live in a world that sometimes romanticizes sarcasm, sharp tongues, and people who say it like it is. But when those words start to make you feel smaller, less capable, or ashamed of who you are, they're not honest. They're not harmful. There is a difference between honesty and cruelty. And people who hide behind sarcasm to deliver painful truths are not being authentic. They're avoiding the vulnerability of saying something with kindness. It often starts so small. A joke about your weight, a comment about your friends, a raised eyebrow when you speak passionately about something you love. But these things compound. Over time, you begin to internalize them. You become quieter. You ask for less. You start to shape yourself into someone who won't trigger those comments. And slowly, you lose pieces of who you were before you met him. Let me be very clear. Being loved should never feel like being under surveillance. You should never have to brace yourself when you walk into a room with the person you love. You should never wonder whether today is the day he'll find something about you to mock. Love doesn't look like that. Respect doesn't feel like that. You deserve someone who speaks life into you, not someone who finds subtle ways to tear you down. You deserve someone who protects your light, not someone who quietly dims it with every comment, because love is not found in someone who controls you with criticism. Love is found in someone who celebrates you exactly as you are. Let's talk about something that can feel intoxicating at first, this whirlwind of emotions, the deep highs and crushing lows, the intensity that feels like passion. It's when you're with someone who makes you feel like you're flying one day and like completely invisible the next. This emotional roller coaster is often mistaken for connection, for chemistry, for love. But I want to be really honest here. When a man lives in emotional extremes, when his presence in your life feels unpredictable and unstable, it's not romance, it's chaos. And that chaos is a red flag. There's this narrative that says real love should sweep us off our feet, that it should be messy and wild and uncontrollable. And sometimes, at the beginning, it feels exactly like that. 1 minute, he's showing up with deep affection, telling you everything he's ever wanted. He's texting you all day, making plans, saying things that feel like poetry. And the next, distance, a cold shoulder. He suddenly withdraws and you don't know why. You're left guessing, spinning, trying to figure out what you did to shift the mood. That emotional inconsistency is not a flaw, it's a pattern, and it's dangerous. Because when someone keeps switching between deep connection and detachment, what you start doing, without even realizing it, is performing. You start chasing the highs, you try harder, you analyze everything you say, you start walking on eggshells, thinking, how do I get that version of him back? The one who made me feel like the center of the universe. But that's the trap. The intensity isn't love, it's a cycle. And the more invested you become, the gray rock, the more you tolerate the lows because you're holding out hope for the next high. That isn't a relationship based on stability or mutual respect. It's one based on survival and uncertainty. Let me be clear, it's not your job to regulate someone else's emotions. It's not your responsibility to try and manage their moods, to decode their silence, or to fix the things they won't even name. If a man can't show up consistently, that inconsistency becomes your emotional burden. You start bracing for disappointment, even in the middle of connection, because deep down you know it's only a matter of time before it fades again. That kind of unpredictability creates anxiety, not intimacy. It doesn't build closeness, it builds confusion. And in that confusion, you start disconnecting from yourself. You lose trust in your own emotional compass. You start wondering if maybe you're too sensitive, too demanding, too complicated. You shrink, not because you want to, but because you're trying to survive inside something that isn't safe. One of the hardest truths we have to learn is that intensity is not the same as intimacy. Intimacy is built slowly. It's rooted in reliability. It's someone showing up not just when they're in the mood, but when it's hard, when they're tired, when they're frustrated. Intimacy doesn't vanish in the morning after a passionate night. It doesn't disappear after an argument. It stays. It works. It holds. When someone is emotionally unstable, you begin to mistake their temporary attention for affection. You cling to the good moments like lifelines. And when they inevitably pull away, you don't feel like yourself anymore. You feel desperate. The goal, like you're not just losing the relationship, you're losing your sense of identity. That isn't love. That's emotional dependency created by instability. And maybe you've been told, well, that's just how he is. He's complicated. He's been hurt before. He doesn't open up easily. And listen, compassion matters. Understanding someone's wounds matters, but not at the expense of your emotional well-being. You are not a rehabilitation center for someone who won't take responsibility for their emotional growth. You can be kind and empathetic and still choose to walk away from someone who uses instability as an excuse. If he's warm one day and distant the next, if you feel adored on Monday and invisible by Friday, if he disappears emotionally when things get real and shows up again only when you stop asking for more, that is not connection. That is control through inconsistency. Because when someone controls the emotional rhythm of a relationship, they control your sense of safety, of clarity, of direction. Consistency is not boring. It's not unromantic. It is the foundation of emotional safety. And safety is what allows us to be vulnerable, to take risks, to grow. When someone shows up the same way on the good days and the hard days, the good rock, when you don't have to wonder where you stand or how they'll respond, that is love. That's what creates real passion, because passion without safety isn't passion. It's emotional gambling. If you are constantly second guessing where you stand, constantly adjusting yourself to fit his moods, constantly hoping that this time things will be different, I want you to know you are worthy of something better. You are worthy of someone whose love doesn't vanish when it's inconvenient. Someone who doesn't disappear emotionally when you need connection the most. You are worthy of a relationship where love is not a question mark. It's a steady, grounded presence. The man who lives in emotional extremes will convince you that his love is deep because it's dramatic, that the highs are high because they're rare. But love doesn't have to hurt to feel real. Love doesn't have to confuse you to be meaningful. Real love doesn't show up only when it wants to. It stays, it listens, it steadies you. If his love feels like a storm, always coming and going, always leaving you soaked and shaken, maybe it's time to stop waiting for the sun to come back out. Maybe it's time to find shelter in yourself, because the man who can't offer emotional consistency isn't offering love. He's offering chaos. And your heart deserves more than chaos. It deserves peace. Let's talk about one of the most seductive and dangerous red flags that too many people gloss over. He avoids accountability. Now, on the surface, This can look like a small thing. Maybe he forgot to text back and said he was busy. Maybe he missed an important event and had what sounded like a decent excuse. Maybe he told a little white lie, then laughed it off and said, "You're overthinking it." But I want you to really hear this. When someone repeatedly avoids responsibility for their actions, it's not just a communication style, it's a reflection of emotional immaturity, and more importantly, it's a relationship risk you cannot afford to ignore. We all make mistakes. We all screw up, lose our tempers, act in ways that don't align with our values. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the pattern when a man consistently sidesteps ownership, when he can't say, "You're right, I hurt you and I need to make this right." When his default is to blame circumstances, other people, or even worse, you. That's not a mistake. That's a mindset, and it doesn't just damage trust. It destroys it from the inside out. Let me be clear, accountability is not about shame or guilt. It's not about punishment. It's about saying, "I did something that hurt you, and I care enough to acknowledge it. I care enough to repair it." When a man refuses to be accountable, what he's really saying is, "Your experience doesn't matter as much as my comfort." He is prioritizing his ego over your emotional safety. And when that happens enough times, it chips away at your confidence, your clarity, and eventually your ability to trust your own instincts. Here's what this often looks like in real time. You bring up something that hurt you. Maybe he spoke to you in a tone that felt dismissive, or he crossed a line you clearly set. You explain calmly, vulnerably, even giving him the benefit of the doubt. But instead of leaning in, he pulls away. He says, "You're too sensitive," or "You're always starting drama," or worse, he flips the script and suddenly you are the one apologizing for even bringing it up. That's not resolution. That's manipulation dressed up in defensiveness. And I know it's so easy to second guess yourself when this happens, especially when he's charming in other moments, when he's funny, successful, when your connection feels deep, until it doesn't. You start thinking, maybe I am asking for too much. Maybe I'm overacting. No, you are not overacting to someone refusing to honor your emotional truth. You are reacting to a red flag that is waving right in front of you. We are wired for connection, but connection without honesty is not intimacy. It's performance. And performance in a relationship is exhausting. You end up editing yourself, walking on eggshells, choosing silence over honesty, because you already know what's coming if you dare to speak your truth. You know it will be met with deflection or denial. That is not safety. That is not partnership. That is not love. That is control. One of the most dangerous things about this red flag is how subtle it can be. Sometimes the man who avoids accountability does it with a smile. He's so smooth, so convincing that you start to question the validity of your own pain. But make no mistake, just because someone is skilled at escaping blame doesn't mean they are innocent. It means they've had a lot of practice avoiding the truth. And if you stay, you will become a master at avoiding your own. What we tolerate teaches people how to treat us. And every time you let it slide, every time you excuse it or rationalize it or blame yourself, you teach him that your boundaries are negotiable. You teach him that you will bend to avoid conflict. And over time, you begin to shrink. That vibrant, intuitive, loving version of yourself gets smaller. Not because you aren't enough, but because the space you're in doesn't honor you. I want to tell you something important. It is not your job to teach a grown man how to take responsibility. It is not your job to carry the emotional weight of the relationship alone. And it is not noble or loving or patient to keep forgiving someone who refuses to change. Real love is not allergic to accountability. Real love invites it. It makes space for hard conversations. It says, "I care about you too much to pretend this didn't happen." And when that kind of love is mutual, it builds something powerful, something safe, the go-away rock, something lasting. But when it's not mutual, when it's one-sided, when you find yourself doing the work of two people, you have to ask yourself, What am I giving up just to be with someone who can't say, I was wrong? You deserve a partner who doesn't get defensive every time you express a need. You deserve someone who doesn't see accountability as an attack, but as a sacred opportunity to grow. You deserve someone who chooses repair over ego, even when it's uncomfortable. Because that's where trust is born, not in perfection, but in the courage to be imperfect together. So if you're in a relationship where every attempt at honesty is met with resistance, silence, or blame, I want you to remember this. It is not your responsibility to carry both your pain and his refusal, face it. It is your responsibility to protect your peace, your clarity, and your sense of self. Walk away from the man who avoids accountability, because if he can't own his actions, he has no business holding your heart. Let's talk about another red flag that often is behind charm, confidence, or what some people mistake as strength. He shuts down vulnerability. And I don't mean he's a little awkward when it comes to expressing emotions. We all stumble there sometimes. I mean, he actively resists it. He avoids it. He shuts it down when it shows up in you or anyone else. And over time, it will slowly erode the emotional connection you thought you had. At first, this might look like emotional unavailability. He jokes when things get serious. He changes the subject when you try to talk about your fears, your insecurities, your dreams. Maybe he rolls his eyes when you get emotional, the goal of the gray rock, or he tells you you're being too sensitive or dramatic. But I want you to hear this clearly. If someone can't sit with you in your vulnerability, they cannot meet you in true intimacy. When you share your heart, your raw, honest truth, it's an invitation. You're saying, here I am, not perfect, not polished, but real. Can you hold this with me? And if the response is discomfort, judgment, or dismissal, that's not about you. The goal of the gray rock, that's about his inability to be with anything that threatens his illusion of control. Because here's the truth, vulnerability is uncomfortable. It's messy. It doesn't always come with clean answers or easy solutions, but it is the birthplace of connection. The goal of the griff, a man can't engage with you emotionally if he can't open up or allow you to open up. The goal of the gray, then what you're building isn't a relationship. It's a performance. It's two people showing up with masks on, hoping the other person doesn't notice the silence underneath. Now here's where it gets tricky. Sometimes the man who shuts down vulnerability is the same one who tells you he cares deeply, or that he's just not good at expressing himself. And so you give him grace. You wait. You take his emotional limitations and turn them into your personal project. But let me tell you something. Connection can't survive when only one person is showing up fully. The great and loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your own need to be seen. Over time, if you stay in that space, you'll start to believe that your feelings are too much. You'll water yourself down. You'll question your instincts. You'll convince yourself that maybe it's safer to stay quiet than risk being shut down again. But emotional safety isn't found in silence. It's found in mutual openness, even when it's messy. You deserve someone who doesn't flinch when you cry, someone who doesn't need you to tone it down, just so he can feel comfortable. You deserve someone who leans in, who says, tell me more. Even what you're saying is hard, because that is what builds lasting love. Not perfection, not constant happiness, but the ability to sit together in the hard moments and say, I'm not going anywhere. If he shuts down vulnerability, he shuts down the very thing that makes love real. There's something incredibly disorienting about being with someone who refuses to take responsibility for their behavior. It's like walking through a house of mirrors. Nothing you reflect back to them ever lands the way it should. You bring up how something hurt you, how a word or an action impacted you, and instead of getting acknowledgement or even curiosity, what you get is defensiveness, blame shifting, or outright denial. And over time, that experience can start to erode your sense of truth. Because when you're with a man who can't take ownership, who avoids accountability at every turn, what ends up happening is that you begin to carry the emotional weight of the entire relationship. the grok. You're not just trying to process your own feelings. You're managing his reactions, calming his guilt, and trying to explain things in 5 different ways, hoping one of them will finally get through. But it never really does, because the truth is, someone who isn't willing to take responsibility isn't looking to understand. You're not in a conversation, you're in a loop. Maybe it looks like this. Every time there's conflict, he flips it back on you. You tell him you felt dismissed or hurt, and suddenly he's the one who's angry. Now you're apologizing for your tone, for your timing, for making it a big deal. And the original issue, it disappears. It gets buried beneath his outrage or silence. And slowly, without even realizing it, you start showing up smaller. You stop bringing things up. You convince yourself that maybe it's not worth the argument. Or worse, maybe I am overreacting. That pattern is emotional manipulation, and it doesn't have to come from someone overtly cruel to still be deeply damaging. In fact, it's often the most subtle, soft-spoken deflections that do the most harm. It's the, "I didn't mean it like that," or "You're just too sensitive," or the "You always take things the wrong way." It sounds almost harmless, but it creates a relationship where you can never quite trust your own feelings. And if you can't trust yourself, you will never feel safe. Here's the hard truthing we all mess up. We all hurt people we love sometimes. But what separates healthy relationships from toxic ones is not perfection. It's ownership. It's someone being able to say, "You're right, that landed in a way I didn't intend, and I'm sorry. Let me understand more." That one moment of accountability can build more trust than 100 apologies with excuses attached. But when that moment never comes, when you're constantly met with resistance or gaslighting, it creates a dynamic where love feels conditional. It feels like it only exists when you're not asking for more, when you're not holding a mirror up to anything uncomfortable. And that's not partnership. That's compliance. If he can't own his behavior, if he always has an excuse, always a reason why it wasn't actually his fault, then you'll spend your time in that relationship working overtime just to feel heard. And I promise you, no amount of love or effort on your part will fix someone's refusal to be accountable. That's a choice only he can make. And if he's not choosing it, it's not your job to stay and hope he eventually will. Because the truth is, love isn't proven through grand gestures or beautiful words. Love is proven in the quiet moments when someone says, "I see what I did. I own it, and I'll do better." Anything less than that isn't love, it's performance. And your heart was never made to live in a performance. It was made for truth, for growth, and for connection built on courage. If he refuses to take responsibility, what he's really saying is, "My comfort is more important than your pain."